It started as a day like every other for Goose. He ate a breakfast of his favorite food. He jumped up on his comfortable couch, and he sat staring at the same screen that always made him happy. But today, something was wrong. Today, for the first time, the screen wasn't making him happy. Today, the screen was making Goose very uncomfortable. It was telling the story of two friends being swept away by a river, getting stranded on a rock in the sea, and being thrown into the ocean. Goose had always been afraid of water, which was one of the reasons why he liked staying inside. It was hard for Goose to keep watching, but something was driving him to do so. And over the next hour and a half, something strange began to happen. Goose began to wish he wasn't afraid of water. The adventure of the characters on the screen started to inspire him, and suddenly he wanted to face his fears and conquer them just like they had. He ran to a place that had always made him very uncomfortable. It was a forest path that led deep into the woods. Goose had never been very far down this path because he knew this path crossed over the water. Goose stared at the water. The river was dark and deep and filled with hundreds of scary fish. Goose's fears overwhelmed him, and suddenly he was in the river. The water was cold. He sank. He couldn't breathe, and the fish began to attack him with their sharp teeth. He just knew he was going to die. Then Goose realized that he wasn't actually in the water at all. He was still standing on the shore, but his anxiety had been so intense he might as well have been drowning. Nevertheless, he held his ground next to the river, until finally, the unimaginable happened. Goose had crossed the river and reached the other side completely unharmed. He had just achieved what he had once thought was impossible. At the age of 56 in dog years, Goose was charging further into the woods than he had ever been before. He was smelling and seeing a part of the world that was completely new to him, and it was exhilarating. Feeling a sense of freedom he hadn't since he was a puppy, Goose looked ahead and saw a mountain, and he wondered what he might see if he was able to get to the top. There was lots of mud and thick, wet brush. The going wasn't very easy. The path that Goose had followed over the river was miles behind him. The mountain slope was steep, and the terrain was rough. His body and mind were both screaming at him to turn around and go back to the comfortable couch, back to his favorite food, back to the warm glow of the screen that made him so happy. But his heart told him to do the exact opposite. The obstacles were getting increasingly difficult. Goose wondered how much more he could take. He wondered how much longer he'd be able to push forward without a meal. Then he smelled something. It was a berry bush. The berries tasted different from his favorite food, and they were a smaller portion than what he was used to. But it was all he had, which turned out to be everything he needed. As Goose emerged from the trees, he saw a beautiful, colorless world from heights he'd never seen it before, and he howled with joy. What had driven him from his couch and across the river and above the trees was now rattling a cage Goose never knew was there, and he never knew he'd been trapped in. The daily routine that Goose had traded for this brilliant adventure now seemed distant and unfulfilling and bland. The fire of the moment burned away desires of the past, a cleansing driven by the spirit possessing this inanimate rock. A rock which Goose climbed higher and higher and higher. And then he couldn't go any higher. He was standing on top. And looking at all the other mountains that surrounded him, Goose wondered what other new things he might experience if he continued to seek the inspiration to challenge the things that made him the most afraid.